All right, guys, welcome to the Modularity panel. Going to try to talk about some of the topics that you may not have heard of so far this week. So we're going to jump in with some introductions. I'm Andy. I run an education company called The Roll Up. So yeah, why don't we start with some brief intros and what modularity means to you in less than 20 words.
Great. Hi, I'm Ben Fish. I'm co-founder and CEO of Espresso Systems. And what modularity means to me is, I think what modularity means to me is that you can have independently constructed systems by different teams that that end users end up leveraging kind of together to create a holistic system. So that would be users using Ethereum, and then also Celestia's DA system, for example. It might also be using different rollups constructed by different teams with different virtual machines on top of Ethereum, etc. It's pretty broad in my view of a definition.
21 words.
Hey, I'm Prabal. I'm one of the co-founders of Avail. I will try to keep it short. Modularity for me means developer freedom and experimentation.
I'm Tess. I work on product for Optimism at OP Labs. I've been in the space for a little while, so I've had a chance to work on a bunch of different protocols and see a bunch of different stuff. Before OP Labs, I was at Twitter, where I worked on the crypto team at Twitter. And how serious are you about this 21 word?
Oh, no, I mean, short and sweet is
Okay,
great.
okay. Then I would say it's about getting people what they want and getting there as quick as possible.
Hi, I'm Chris. I work at Off-Chain Labs. We are the R&D arm of Arbitrum, more or less. And for modularity, I think that we have focused on making our stack like fully customizable for developers that like want to roll their own app chains, and even like being able to use their own custom gas token, things like that. But being able to like customize the stack, I think, is a big part of it.
I agree, and that's kind of on the line of the first question. I find it a little bit ironic that we have two representatives, one from Arbitrum and one from Optimism, for this question, because I put out this tweet that was like, guys, I just don't think we need more general purpose L2s in this market. Like, I just don't see the value in adding more of these broad execution environments, and that's obviously a blanket statement, but what I'd like to ask you guys first is, do we need more universal or general purpose L2s in the market, and why or why not? And yeah.
Well, I mean, what do you mean by a general purpose L2, right?
Like the next copy of Optimism or Arbitrum or a ZK EVM or a just a general purpose DeFi ecosystem, to effectively compete with Optimism at the core level, or Arbitrum, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is like, we do think chains do a lot better when they have some kind of niche that they're going after. So whether that requires them to really like customize their block space or not depends a lot on the use cases and the audiences that they're going after. I mean, I do think that if you just try to like copy and paste one of the existing chains and expect that it'll just come together and people will want to build on your chain and will form this ecosystem, like that, it's true that that's not really the case anymore. That said, like I think there is still a lot of demand for block space. There's a lot of demand for different kinds of customizations, and so I think there's still that demand there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I generally think it's going to get tougher. I do think there's a power law distribution probably where there's going to be like a top 20 or so, and they're going to have most of the liquidity at L2. Depends on if your L2 has a different purpose or not. ENS is looking at launching their own L2. I don't think they're going to ever try to be a general purpose rollup. They want it to be focused on ENS. Things like that, that if you've already got the mass adoption, that's also another use case. If you're already an institution, like when Coinbase launched Base or whatever, they already have the user base to pull those people in. So yeah, like I think it depends on if you already have an audience or not. But if not, it's going to be an uphill battle unless you can come up with some marketing hook like Blast did to like kind of pull in users and liquidity and things like that at the L2 level, I think.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take. Like, I'm a big fan of Pudgy Penguins. They just launched this idea of abstract chain, and their moat, I think, even though it's kind of use case specific, is still like this top of funnel. It's, we can go out and do marketing and bring non-crypto native users in, whereas the technical moats aren't really there. It's going to be like a ZK L2 effectively. Prabal, on one of our streams, or yeah. On one of our streams, you mentioned this idea of custom rollups, custom transaction states, no VM baggage, I think you said. What does that mean to you in the context of that first question that I asked, and kind of how are you thinking about this idea of rollups as microservices more so and applications?
Yeah, I think right now we are seeing more of the same, right? So we know that EVM is the status quo, and all the rollups that we see in the space are just the same virtual machine, customized for maybe what is deployed on it. That's mostly it. But some of them customize the block times, some of them customize the gas fees and the tuning and centralized versus decentralized, those kind of stuff. I think what we want to see is app specificity in its true form. And app specificity doesn't mean only deployment of one application on a chain. App specificity means that the chain is built for that application. And right now, the stacks are not there. Probably it's getting built. But more and more, we will see that if you wanted just payments, then UTXO might be better than just EVM, right? If you want programmability, maybe EVM is the best if you wanted to have Turing complete nature. But I think other players like Move and others are challenging that, which is great to see. And that's why I think right now, if you see some of the new entrants, they are changing the state structure. They are changing the transaction structure. They are changing the database engine. They are changing the Merkle trees, which are extremely good to see because now you can tune your entire cryptography around these structures, which are optimized for your purpose, not for everything. There are, of course, downsides, but you can take points of the trade-off, which is the reason why we want to be modular at all.
Anything to add?
Oh yeah, I think about this question a little bit differently. So first of all, I think it's important to distinguish between roll-up stacks and actual roll-ups. And largely when we talk about, top 20 or whatever, we're talking about stacks, right? Because within each ecosystem, there's like many different people using the OP stack, different people using the Arbitrum stack, et cetera, et cetera. And so asking whether we need more stacks is like asking, do we need more programming languages? And I don't know that we can sit here and ask, do we need it or not? It's something that will either naturally happen because there's demand from developers or not. And then there's the question of, well, how many roll-ups should there be, right? And again, I don't think we can sit here and ask that question philosophically, how many roll-ups should there be? Because I actually don't think that the entire roll-up space has developed from this top-down plan to scale Ethereum. Rather, I view it from the perspective of developers and specifically applications. If you're an application, from your perspective, you have an incentive to run your own chain because that gives you price congestion independence from Ethereum. That gives you the ability to take more revenue for yourself instead of leaking that revenue to Ethereum validators. And so rollups have become a tool for applications to become independent and sovereign, and there's this natural incentive towards that. And the only thing holding that back is the benefit that applications get from existing within the same virtual machine. But as we come up with newer and newer ideas, that benefit is also diminishing.
Yeah, that's kind of the beauty of modularity as a whole is this kind of idea of scaling that block space as you want. But then there's also these kind of trade-offs that exist, and this may be a spicy question, guys, but maybe I'll start with you, Chris. I think in the state of rollups now and in modularity, we have like there's certain vectors of risk when you kind of build these modular stacks that aren't present in just the L1. Rollups are inherently just slightly more risky than the Ethereum base layer, but they do inherit the security. Now, I asked this to Harry, and I'm going to ask you: is Arbitrum ever going to decentralize its sequencer?
Oh yeah, I mean that's something we're working with Espresso on. So that's certainly something that we're highly interested in. So yeah, I think that'll come sooner than you probably think. At some, like so. I definitely.
Why would you do that?
Why
Yeah,
decentralize?
why not keep the current setup and kind of internalize all the benefits?
Keep the MEV for ourselves? Is that what?
I'm not suggesting that.
No, no. I mean, because we want at least Arbitrum One to be the maximum decentralization for a roll up. Because I mean, we're willing to make other trade-offs with like Nova, where we're willing to have added trust assumptions and things like that. But with R1 in particular, we want it to be like the most decentralized secure chain that it can be, and part of that is decentralizing the sequencer so that even we can't rug the community or unfairly capitalize on MEV or whatever. So like it's about that for us. Yeah.
I'm curious your answer as well, Jess, but I imagine it may be quite similar.
Yeah, I mean, decentralizing our sequencer is definitely something that we're looking forward to doing, and it's on the roadmap and part of the plan. That said, the things that we're focusing on today are a little bit more tactical, and they're much more about getting towards, becoming a stage 2 rollup. So OP mainnet just became a stage 1 rollup about a month ago, which is definitely a big milestone for our ecosystem. We're now working on getting the rest of the OP chains up to that level as well, and then we're looking towards stage 2. And the way that we're getting there actually ties really nicely back into this idea of modularity, because the modularity of the OP stack is one of the things that will let us build redundant proof systems. So we'll have both the proof system that exists today for OP mainnet and other OP stack chains, which is comprised of 2 components called Canon and the OP program. So it's a VM and then a program that runs on that VM. But we're now working on a parallel fault proof system that's completely independent, open source, written in Rust. And because you can kind of just like slot these pieces, pop these pieces in and out, we're able to work with external teams and really work with the open source Rust community in Ethereum, right, to make this happen. So for us, I mean, and this kind of goes back to my answer about like what modularity is, right? Because for us, it's like, okay, we're gonna get people what they want and they can make the customizations, but it's also about moving more quickly and really leveraging those communities and open source contributors.
Yeah, I think what you guys are doing that's particularly interesting as well is I think you guys are calling them like modular smart contracts in a sense where you can actually access smart contracts on different chains and also kind of like modularize the smart contracts themselves into these like modular apps. I saw James' presentation yesterday at the Optimism Gathering. It was good. Now, kind of shifting out of this is a little bit of heavy air there with the decentralized sequencing, and I think a lot of us have heard of this. This idea that I've been seeing in the zeitgeist and kind of been toying around with is this idea of kind of temporary roll-ups or temporary chains where, for some use case, a builder can create a roll-up, launch it, use it, and then when finished, kind of put it in the trash bin. I'm curious if you guys see a use case for this. If so, what creative ideas may you have, or is this kind of a concept that may be best in theory but not in practice?
Would you call that like an ephemeral rollup that it just spins up for temporary instance and then
Exactly.
it has a predetermined wind down state where it, yeah, I mean like Arbitrum, the co-founders originally were like thinking about doing poker roll-ups where each instance would be a roll-up more or less, and then each game instance would wind down on that kind of basis. Maybe with the way the ecosystem's evolving with L3s, and then even like one of our popular games, Proof of Play, is looking at sharding across multiple instances. They may need to be able to wind some of those down. They probably won't. They might have to fluctuate the number of shards they have or whatever during depending on congestion. So things like that, I think, are super interesting. But yeah, I think there's definitely a use case there.
Yeah, I would say yes, heavy yes, because I think we are in an alt layer event. Alt layer guys had done a lot of these ephemeral rollups when they started. I'm guessing you guys still do. And not only that, we are already seeing them starting to have in the wild like a few ephemeral rollups. For example, I mean, it might be a gamified one, but On 7th, we hosted our Unification Cup, and it was a micro roll-up powered by Stacker, which was an ephemeral one, where it kept to course just because we can. It's nothing useful. But if you think like there are other stuff, for example, there has been work in music concerts where we want to give tickets as NFTs. And after the concert, maybe after a few months, it's no longer needed. So those kind of state, you can always have a representation, a digest of all the state back to the base layer, so that if you later want to show that you were there or something like that, you can always keep the state root back on the L1 and just be done with it. But you do not need to continue to produce blocks, and I think that's beautiful because there are major use cases where you do not need the continuity and the lifelong existence of the rollup just because you have to.
Yeah, maybe just to hop in here, and thanks guys for
Welcome.
letting me join. I think this starts to look more like the coprocessor definition, where you kind of have some specific task which you'd like to offload from, you'd like to offload the execution from the consensus of, whatever the DA or L1 is. And an ephemeral rollup kind of looks like this kind of one-time task that maybe you can get the benefits of like horizontal scaling if the task is like able to be parallelized into many different pieces. I know like some of the ZK aggregation guys are thinking about this in the context of how they can get like horizontal scaling across different rollup instances, but yeah, I think the line becomes blurry, like between an ephemeral rollup and a coprocessor, where you're just like asking for some execution to be returned to you, but the rollup just has like the state transition function as the context in which you're like encoding that task, I guess. And maybe that's just a developer experience advantage for someone who wants to dispatch this task off, as opposed to like having to define it in some DSL for like a ZK coprocessor or something. But yeah, I think the line between like the different definitions of like rollup and coprocessor becomes blurred with ephemeral rollups.
I don't think there's a big difference between an ephemeral rollup and an ephemeral contract. So, I mean, we can ask the same question. Is there a use case for a smart contract to not persist its state forever, right? Well, there are many examples of this, like games, right? You don't necessarily need to persist the state of a game forever, and that was the poker example. And then the question of whether an application should be its own rollup or not is sort of orthogonal in my mind. So they're going to be ephemeral contracts, very, very long-living contracts, and for every set of long-living contracts and ephemeral contracts, we can ask, should it be its own rollup, or should it just be part of another rollup?
Cool. Thanks for the insights there. I think one thing, kind of bringing this back to modularity, I think we've been talking about rollups, but I think oftentimes rollups and modularity are kind of the Ethereum scaling in a modular fashion. But more specifically with modularity into kind of the ZK realm, there's been the rise of ZK VMs. So Risk Zero has gone live with their first ZK VM, succinct as SP1, I think, if not live already, very soon. So the cost of generating ZK proofs is going down significantly, as well as the speed to verify. So we're kind of entering this era of ZK, this renaissance that's been building up, if you will. Which parts of the modular stack do you guys think are most, I guess, susceptible to being ZKified, or for ZK to play a big role, and kind of why is it so important that ZK VMs are now entering this modular picture?
I can start. I mean, I really like the ZK VMs and the development that they are bringing. It just opens up the verifiable computation space, whether that be through coprocessors, as he put it, whether that you call them roll-ups, what kind of construct you call them is how you define it, right? But you can have off-chain computes and you can verify them on-chain very efficiently. Because the cost of experimentation is going down, that's what is happening right now with all the roll-ups, with all the ZK VMs, with all the modularity that we are bringing. As I answered in the first question, it's just that the cost of experimentation is so down, which means that new applications are going to come in. because when developers have the design space and the ability to churn out quick experiments, it's when new results should come up. And that's what we are doing right now here, right? And it would be just very cool to see like what all gets ZK-fied. I guess Optimism has already started on that journey. I mean, parts of those other stacks can also be ZK-fied. Even if it's an optimistic rollup, the fraud proofs can be ZK-fied, and there are other types of things which can be done just by making any computation verifiable on chain.
So ZKVMs are making experimentation extremely cheap and easy amidst other modular parts, which is extremely positive.
Absolutely. I mean, just take a look at the recursion performances of RISC-0, SP1. They're fabulous. I mean, if you can just compress and like have multiple of these proofs together, and they're just mind-blowing, to be honest.
Yeah, I actually want to tie together a couple of the things that both Prabal and Ben mentioned, and this actually goes back to the question about ephemeral rollups as well, which really is, I think, so much of this is about lowering the cost of experimentation, whether that's the actual literal cost, or sometimes even just like the psychological weight of launching a rollup, right? So when you break things down into these pieces and make it easier and easier to spin these different things up and just dabble with what exactly you need, that opens up this space for the community, for the market, for people to just explore new things. And I think it's really hard, and then this kind of gets back into what Ben was saying, I think it's really hard to like sit up here and be like prescriptive, about like what we think should happen or how things should be, because like the reality is that so much of this is about just opening up that experimentation space and kind of like creating fertile ground for people who are, way more creative than I am to figure out what could be done and then to play in that space and explore with it.
I want to just tag on to that. So I totally agree. We can't really say here what we should do, but I think we can say what would ZK enable, right? And there's a huge debate over ZK versus optimistic rollups. I actually personally think that settlement to the L1, it's not that important whether it uses optimistic or ZK. And the reason is that most of the execution is moving to L2s, and I mean, generally the activity on the L1, it can be slow, and we're anyways constrained by the L1 in such a way that ZK proofs are not posted very frequently, right? They're even if ZK proofs get faster, there will always be benefits to delaying the posting of a ZK proof for compression reasons, etc. And so ZK versus optimistic on the L1 settlement doesn't make a ton of difference in my mind, but where ZK is going to be super, super important is when we see L2s interacting with each other. And when L2s interact with each other, then the full nodes of one L2 need to get a very, very fast attestation about what the state of the other L2 is. And that's going to only happen through ZK, right? It would be crazy for it to happen through optimistic mechanisms because that just wouldn't be an attestation. We would end up 7 days later having some massive reorg that screws everyone over. And I see the optimistic ecosystems kind of moving in this direction too, right? Like with Superchain right now, you have the full nodes of each chain in the superchain running full nodes for each other. But if you are starting to use ZK systems in order to remove that, then you could, down the line, have full nodes of one node in the superchain just get a fast proof. Yeah.
Can I tag on to that? I know
Yeah.
I've just talked a bunch, but just to tag on to that very quickly, we are working on interoperability within the superchain, but one of the constraints of the V0, this won't be true forever, but one of the constraints of the V0 of the superchain interop is that the blockchains on both sides of a cross-chain transaction have to have pretty similar block space. And so that, does remove some of the benefits of modularity and customization and all these things we've been talking about today. And so I do think that to get to that level where you can have really rich cross-chain interactions between very heterogeneous chains, you do need that ZK component. So anyway, thank you for calling it out.
I would love to just quickly hop in here because, I'm also working on this exact problem of kind of modularizing the interoperability solution between these heterogeneous rollup frameworks. And I would actually push back and say that even in the presence of ZK-like clients for a lot of these rollups, I don't necessarily think that other rollups will actually be verifying this, and that's purely from a user experience perspective. I think we're still far from the latency and cost overhead of individual ZK Lite client proofs being conducive to a consumer grade experience, like a point of sale style settlement. And I think we will still have optimistic systems layered on top of these ZK settlements just to get faster attestations or pre-confs of other roll-up state. And this is actually exactly what we're building at Hyperlane with our AVS, is basically layering this optimistic economic security on top of interop between rollups and using ZK or optimistic settlement to the L1 to only settle fraud. So you can there is, I think, a spectrum between where these systems make sense. And from my perspective, even ZK, I love what SP1 and all of these folks are doing, but I still think we're maybe a few years away from a consumer grade kind of cost basis and latency.
I disagree, because in Avail Nexus we are already trying that. We are already trying with SP1 and RISC-0 both, and it's faster than you think. The recent benchmarks are amazing. Is there not a problem? Yes, there are problems. Is it in the matter of microseconds? No. Is it in the order of seconds? Yes. And it depends on what are you trying to give up in order to get that fast finality, right? If you want economic guarantees to persist, and then the edges become very, very unclear. When you start going from optimistic to cryptographic means, the edges become super unclear, and probably it's worth it to wait for more, because users are, right now, blockchain users are already waiting for a long time.
I think we're out of time, but you can always have both together, right? You can always compose the optimistic pre-confirmation with ZK after, and it's just the risk is about timescales. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that, I agree that a hybrid approach will probably be the way the ecosystem evolves between ZK proofs and optimistic proofs. And then I think that one benefit of optimistic rollups, because we get the real-time execution speed, and no matter how fast ZKs go, I mean, it's always going to be at least an order of magnitude or several orders of magnitude slower. And yes, you can parallelize it in a data center, but you ultimately will always be slower than like real-time execution. And I think optimistic rollups benefit about being able to like innovate on the client level faster sometimes, because of the assumptions that many ZK teams are built for, like proving a specific stack. So at the optimistic level, we can experiment more rapidly at the client level, which I think is nice.
Thank you, guys. Let's have a warm round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.